It started with a text message at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I was sitting at my desk, staring at a spreadsheet that had begun to blur together after 3 hours of mindless data entry, when my phone buzzed against the polished oak surface. It was from Mark. We had been married for 4 years, together for 7, and our relationship had settled into that comfortable, deeply predictable rhythm that feels like a warm blanket until you realize it is slowly suffocating you. The text read, "Hey babe, just a heads up, Todd is back in town. Things went south with his landlord in Chicago, and he needs a place to crash for a couple of weeks, just to get back on his feet. I told him he could use our couch. Hope that's cool." I remember staring at the screen for a long time before typing back a simple, "Yeah, of course. Let him know the spare blankets are in the hallway closet." Todd wasn't just anyone. He was Mark's best friend since their freshman year at Ohio State, the kind of friend who is practically stitched into the fabric of your life, whether you want them there or not. He was the best man at our wedding, the guy who made a speech that was just a little too long and a little too loud, making everyone laugh while secretly making me hold my breath. Todd was different from Mark in every way that counted. Where Mark was steady, quiet, and intensely focused on his career in corporate finance, Todd was a whirlwind of unstructured energy. He moved from city to city, changing jobs like coats, always chasing some new venture that promised everything and delivered nothing. But he had a magnetism that made people forgive his flakiness. He was tall, with a sharp jawline and dark hair that always looked like he had just rolled out of bed. And he possessed an effortless confidence that could make a small suburban living room feel like the center of the universe. When I got home from work that evening, the dynamic in our house had already shifted. The front door was unlocked, and the scent of expensive takeout pizza and stale cigarette smoke hung heavy in the entryway. I walked into the living room to find Mark and Todd sitting on the rug, a half-empty six-pack of IPA between them, surrounded by cardboard boxes and duffel bags that looked like they had been thrown down in a hurry. They were laughing so hard that neither of them noticed me at first. It was a sound I hadn't heard from Mark in a long time, that deep, uninhibited chest laugh that used to be common back when we were 23 and living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in the city. "Hey, look who it is," Todd called out, scrambling to his feet with a massive grin. Before I could even put my purse down, he wrapped me in a hug that smelled like leather jacket and cold air. It was a little too tight, a little too familiar, but that was just Todd. "Sarah, you look incredible, seriously." Mark is a lucky bastard, and I'm officially apologizing in advance for ruining your pristine house for the next 2 weeks. "It's good to see you, Todd," I said, offering a polite smile as I stepped back, smoothing down my cardigan. I looked over at Mark, who was beaming up at us from the floor, his cheeks slightly flushed from the beer. "He's staying in the living room, babe," Mark said, pulling himself up onto the couch. "We'll make it work. It's just until he finds an apartment in the North End." That was the beginning of it. Those first few days were noisy, chaotic, and entirely disruptive to our neatly manicured suburban routine. Our house was a standard 3-bedroom colonial in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Boston. It was the kind of place where people mowed their lawns on Saturday mornings and kept their holiday decorations up for exactly 3 weeks. Mark and I had a system for everything: who made the coffee, who took out the trash, what time the lights went out. Todd broke every single rule without even trying. He left his dirty coffee mugs on the kitchen counter, his boots in the middle of the hallway, and his acoustic guitar leaning against the dining room table like a permanent fixture. Yet, despite the clutter, I found myself looking forward to coming home. Mark's job had been demanding a lot of overtime lately, leaving me alone in the house from 6 in the evening until nearly 9 or 10 at night. With Todd there, the house wasn't quiet anymore. He was always around, usually sitting at the kitchen island working on his laptop or strumming aimlessly on his guitar. He started making dinner for us, or at least attempting to, turning our kitchen into a war zone of flour and garlic while telling stories about his time in Chicago or the summer he spent working on a fishing boat in Alaska. I found myself listening to him with an intensity that surprised me. Mark's conversations had become transactional over the years, mostly consisting of updates about the mortgage, complaints about his boss, or scheduling oil changes for the cars. Todd talked about things that didn't matter, but felt incredibly vital. He noticed things too. One evening, after Mark had texted to say he'd be late yet again for a quarterly audit, Todd looked up from the stove where he was searing steaks. "He works too hard," Todd said softly, his dark eyes fixing on me as I sat at the island with a glass of Pinot Noir. If I had a woman like you waiting for me at home, Sarah, you couldn't pay me enough to stay in an office past 5 o'clock. My heart did a strange, uncomfortable flutter against my ribs. It was a classic Todd line, smooth, slightly inappropriate, delivered with a casual charm that made it hard to take offense. "He's providing for our future, Todd," I replied, keeping my voice even, though I could feel the heat rising into my neck. "Sure," Todd said, turning back to the stakes with a slight shrug of his shoulders. "But the future doesn't mean much if you're too tired to live in the present." The words stuck with me long after dinner was over, and Todd had retreated to his makeshift bed in the living room. I lay awake in our master bedroom that night, listening to the rhythmic, heavy breathing of Mark beside me. He had come home at midnight, kissed my forehead without waking up fully, and immediately rolled over to sleep. I felt a profound, aching sense of loneliness that night, a feeling that had been creeping up on me for months, but had suddenly become undeniable in the presence of someone who actually looked at me when I spoke. By the second week, the boundaries began to blur, in ways that were subtle at first. Mark had to fly out to Chicago for a 4-day conference, ironically, the very city Todd had just fled. The night before Mark left, we all had dinner together, and Mark jokingly told Todd to watch over the house and make sure I didn't get bored. We all laughed, but when Mark's Uber pulled away toward Logan Airport the next morning, the silence in the house felt heavy, almost electric. That first night alone with Todd, the atmosphere changed completely. There was no Mark to act as a buffer, no shared history to anchor us to our respective roles. Todd asked if I wanted to watch a movie, and we ended up on the living room sofa, sharing a bottle of whiskey that Mark had received for his birthday, but never opened. We sat on opposite ends of the couch initially, our legs stretched out, but as the hours wore on and the bottle emptied, the distance between us seemed to evaporate. Todd started talking about his failures, not the funny, self-deprecating stories he told at dinner parties, but the real ones. He talked about the crushing weight of feeling like he was 32 and had nothing to show for his life. No savings, no permanent address, no one who truly belonged to him. He looked vulnerable in a way that shattered my perception of him as a carefree rogue. I look at Mark and I see everything I ever wanted but was too terrified to try for, Todd whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He turned his head on the back of the couch, looking at me from just inches away. He has this beautiful house. He has stability. He has you. Todd, I started, my breath catching in my throat. I should have stood up. I should have gone upstairs to my marriage bed and locked the door. Every instinct I had as a faithful wife, as a woman who valued her morals and her life, was screaming at me to run, but I didn't move. The alcohol had numbed my inhibitions, and the raw, unadulterated attention he was giving me was like water to a person dying of thirst. I've always envied him, Sarah, Todd continued, reaching out a hand to gently trace the line of my jaw with the tips of his fingers. His touch was warm, slightly rough, and it sent a jolt of pure electricity straight down my spine. From the very first day he brought you to meet us, I thought to myself, why does he get the angel? Why do I always get left out in the cold? I couldn't look away from him. The guilt was there, a dark shadow lurking at the edge of my mind, but it was completely overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of the moment. For years I had felt invisible, reduced to a set of domestic duties and a routine that left no room for passion. Todd was looking at me like I was the only thing that mattered in the entire world. When he leaned in, I didn't pull back. Our lips met in a kiss that started hesitant, almost experimental, before igniting into something desperate and consuming. It was a betrayal that felt like a homecoming, a beautiful, devastating disaster that I knew, even in that fleeting second, would change the trajectory of my entire life. But the scent of Todd's cologne was faintly present on my skin, and the memory of his hands, his mouth, and the sheer desperation of what we had done down on that living room couch was too sharp to deny. I sat up, pulling the duvet tightly around my chest, staring at the empty space beside me where Mark was supposed to be. Mark, who was currently in a hotel room in downtown Chicago, probably waking up early to review his presentation slides, completely oblivious to the fact that his life had been dismantled in his absence. The guilt was an actual physical weight, pressing down on my lungs until I could barely breathe. I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I had taken the 7 years of trust, history, and quiet devotion that Mark and I had built and set it on fire for a few hours of reckless validation. When I finally forced myself to go downstairs, the house was dead silent. I walked into the kitchen, my limbs heavy and shaking. Todd was sitting at the kitchen island, a mug of black coffee between his hands, staring intently at the granite countertop. He looked completely drained, the usual rakish charm entirely absent from his face. When he heard my footsteps on the hardwood floor, he looked up, and for the first time since I had known him, he looked genuinely afraid. "Sarah," he said, his voice raw and barely above a whisper. He started to stand up, stretching a hand out toward me, but I immediately stepped back, pressing my back against the refrigerator.
"Don't," I choked out, the words sharp and cutting through the quiet room. "Just don't, Todd, please." He dropped his hand, sinking back onto the bar stool. He rubbed his face with both hands, a deep, ragged sigh escaping his chest. "I am so sorry. God, Sarah, I don't even know what to say. I never wanted to hurt Mark, and I never ever wanted to make things complicated for you. I've had these feelings for so long, and last night, with the drinks and being here alone with you, I lost my mind." "We both did," I said, my voice trembling as a tear finally slipped down my cheek. "We ruined everything. He's your best friend, Todd. He's my husband. How could we do this to him?" "We can't let him find out," Todd said quickly, standing up again, this time stepping closer but keeping a respectful distance. His eyes were wide, urgent. "Sarah, listen to me. It was a mistake, a horrible, massive mistake. But if Mark finds out, it destroys him. It destroys my friendship with him, and it destroys your marriage. We have to bury this. I'll pack my things today. I'll tell him I found a room on Craigslist or that an old buddy in Southie offered me a place. I'll be gone before he gets back on Friday." I looked at him, seeing the panic in his eyes, and realized he was right. The truth wouldn't liberate anyone here. It would only act as a bomb, shattering 3 lives in an instant. If Todd left immediately, if we never spoke of it again, maybe I could carry the secret to my grave.
Maybe I could spend the rest of my life making it up to Mark, being the perfect wife, paying penance for the ultimate sin in silence. "Okay," I whispered, wiping the moisture from my face with the back of my hand. "Pack your stuff. You need to be out of here by tonight." Todd nodded solemnly, his jaw tight. "I'll be out before 5. I'm so sorry, Sarah." I couldn't stay in the house with him while he gathered his life into those battered duffel bags. I grabbed my car keys, threw on a jacket, and drove aimlessly for hours. I drove past the local high school, past the grocery store where Mark and I did our shopping every Sunday, through the idyllic New England suburbs that suddenly felt like a massive, suffocating stage set. Everyone else was living their normal, uncomplicated lives, while I was driving around with a chest full of radioactive secrets. I ended up in a Target parking lot, sitting in my SUV for 3 hours, staring at the steering wheel, waiting for the clock to tick down to 5. When I finally returned home at 5:30, the house was dark. I walked inside, half expecting to find a note, but there was nothing. The living room was perfectly neat again. The blankets were folded, the acoustic guitar was gone, and the stray coffee mugs had been washed and put back in the cabinets. It was as if Todd had never existed, as if the past 2 weeks had been wiped clean from the physical world. I stood in the center of the living room, feeling a bizarre mixture of profound relief and an intense hollow ache that I hated myself for feeling. The next 3 days were a masterclass in psychological torture. Mark called me every night from Chicago, his voice crackling through the phone line, full of mundane updates about keynote speakers and steak dinners with potential clients. Every time he said, "I love you, babe," a jagged piece of glass turned in my throat. I had to force my voice to sound normal, to ask the right questions, to pretend that I was just the lonely wife waiting at home. He mentioned Todd on Thursday night, asking how his job hunt was going. I lied smoothly, the words coming out of my mouth with a terrifying ease that made me sick to my stomach. I told him Todd had reconnected with a guy from college who had an open bedroom in South Boston and had moved out early to save us the space. Mark just laughed and said, "That's classic Todd, always moving at 100 miles an hour." Friday afternoon arrived, and with it the impending reality of Mark's return. His flight was scheduled to land at Logan at 4, meaning he would be home by 5:30. I spent the morning cleaning the house with a manic intensity. I scrubbed the baseboards, bleached the kitchen counters, and changed the sheets on our bed, desperately trying to wash away any lingering trace of my betrayal. I wanted the house to look pristine, to look like the home of a woman who had spent her week doing nothing but missing her husband. By 5 o'clock, I was waiting. I had poured myself a small glass of white wine to calm my rattling nerves, sitting on the edge of the living room sofa, the very sofa I couldn't look at without seeing flashes of Todd's skin. The minutes crawled by. 5:15, 5:25. Then I heard the familiar sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway. The garage door opened with its heavy, mechanical groan. My heart started hammering against my ribs, so loudly I thought it might burst through my skin. I stood up, smoothing down my jeans, putting on the face I had been practicing in the mirror for 3 days. The door from the garage to the kitchen unlocked. Mark walked in, dragging his rolling suitcase behind him. He looked tired, his tie loosened around his collar, his hair slightly messy from the flight. But the moment his eyes met mine, his face lit up with that familiar, warm smile that had always made me feel safe. "Hey," he said, dropping his bag and opening his arms. I ran to him. I threw my arms around his neck and buried my face in his shoulder, holding on to him with a desperation that he completely misunderstood. I breathed in the familiar smell of him, the cedarwood cologne, the faint scent of airport air and travel, and I squeezed my eyes shut against the tears that were threatening to spill.
Wow, Mark laughed softly, wrapping my arms tightly around my waist and lifting me slightly off the ground. "Miss me a little bit, did you?" "You have no idea," I choked out, pressing my face harder into his neck. "I missed you so much, Mark. I'm so glad you're home." He kissed the top of my head, holding me for a long time in the quiet kitchen. For a brief, shining second, as I held my husband in our beautiful home, I actually believed Todd's words. I believed that we could bury it. I believed that the secret could stay hidden forever, and that life could go back to exactly the way it was before that fateful Tuesday afternoon text. But as Mark pulled back to look at me, his smile slowly faded, replaced by a subtle, creeping look of confusion that made my blood run entirely cold. Mark's eyes scanned my face, his brows drawing together slightly as he noticed the tension in my jaw, the slight puffiness around my eyes that no amount of makeup could completely hide. He reached up, his thumb gently wiping away a stray tear that had escaped down my cheek. "Hey, what's wrong? You're shaking, Sarah. Is everything okay? Did something happen while I was gone?" "No," I said quickly, the word coming out a little too fast, a little too loud. I forced a laugh, a brittle, hollow sound that echoed uncomfortably in the clean kitchen. "No, nothing's wrong at all. I'm just really emotional today, I guess. I had a super stressful week at work, and the house felt so empty without you here." "I'm just incredibly relieved you're back safely." Mark studied me for another agonizing second, his deep brown eyes looking for any sign of deception. He was a guy who dealt in logic and numbers, a man who could spot a discrepancy in a financial portfolio from a mile away, and the fear that he would spot the discrepancy in my behavior was paralyzing. But then his expression softened, the familiar warmth returning to his eyes. He kissed my forehead again, his hand sliding down to rub my arms. "I know, babe. I hated being away too. The hotel was miserable and the meetings just dragged on forever. Honestly, all I could think about during the flight home was just sitting on the couch with you and doing absolutely nothing." Every word he spoke was like a localized seismic shock to my conscience. He was so good, so completely decent, and I was standing in front of him pretending to be the woman he deserved, while carrying the weight of an unforgivable sin. "Let me get changed out of these work clothes," Mark said, pulling his rolling suitcase towards the stairs. "Then let's order from that Thai place you like down the street. We can just relax." "That sounds perfect," I managed to say, watching his back as he walked up the stairs. The moment he disappeared around the landing, I collapsed against the kitchen counter, my knees barely supporting my weight. I gripped the edge of the granite until my knuckles turned white. The first hurdle was over. He had believed me.
The lie had held up under its first real test, but the relief was entirely temporary, replaced instantly by the realization that this was my life now. I was going to be looking at my husband through a veil of deception for the rest of our lives, constantly monitoring my tone, my expressions, my body language, making sure the truth never accidentally leaked out. Dinner that night was an exercise in pure performance art. We sat at the dining room table, the cartons of pad thai and spring rolls spread out between us. Mark talked about his presentations, detailing the questions the board had asked him and the potential promotion that his boss had hinted at during a private lunch. I nodded along, smiling at the right moments, asking standard follow-up questions, all while the food tasted like absolute ash in my mouth. "Oh, by the way," Mark said, pausing with his fork halfway to his mouth. "I texted Todd when I landed. I told him he should come over this weekend so we could celebrate his new place and catch up properly. He hasn't texted me back yet, which is kind of weird, even for him. Usually he's all over a free meal." My heart stopped. My pulse screamed in my ears, a high-pitched ringing that made it hard to focus on Mark's face. "Oh, well, you know Todd," I said, my voice incredibly tight as I carefully set my chopsticks down so he wouldn't see my fingers trembling. "He probably has his hands full with the new apartment." "Moving into a new place in the city is always a chaotic mess. He's probably just exhausted." "Yeah, true," Mark muttered, looking down at his phone on the table. "He's probably just crashed out. I'll give him a call tomorrow morning if I don't hear back from him tonight." "Don't push him too hard, Mark," I said, a little too urgently. Mark looked up, a trace of mild surprise on his face. I immediately softened my tone, trying to sound casual. "I just mean, he seemed really stressed when he left here. He felt bad about imposing on us, I think. Give him a few days to settle in before you drag him back out here." Mark smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You're always so thoughtful, babe. You're right. I'll give him some space. I'm just glad he got things sorted out so quickly. I was genuinely worried about him." The irony was a physical sickness. He was praising my thoughtfulness while I was protecting the man I had cheated on him with. I pulled my hand away under the guise of clearing the table, picking up the plastic containers and walking them over to the trash can just to escape his touch. That night, lying in bed next to Mark, the silence of the house was absolute torture. He fell asleep almost instantly, his arm wrapped securely around my waist, pulling me tight against his chest. It was the position we had slept in for years, the position that had always made me feel completely protected from the world. But tonight, it felt like a prison. His warmth felt like a branding iron, a constant reminder of what I had thrown away. I lay awake for hours, staring at the shadows dancing across the ceiling, wondering how a person could feel so entirely empty and so incredibly heavy at the exact same time. By Saturday afternoon, things seemed to settle into a fragile version of normalcy. Mark had gone out to the garage to tinker with the lawnmower, and I was in the living room, trying to read a book, but mostly just turning the pages without absorbing a single syllable. The phone rang, the sharp sound shattering the quiet of the afternoon. I glanced at the caller ID on the kitchen counter. It was an unknown number with a Boston area code. I picked it up, my chest tightening. "Hello? Sarah, is that you?" The voice was frantic, breathless, and instantly recognizable. It wasn't Todd. It was a woman's voice, sharp and laced with an underlying current of hysterical anger. It took me a second to place it, and then it hit me like a bucket of ice water. It was Chloe, Todd's on-again, off-again girlfriend from Chicago, the woman he had claimed he was completely finished with before he moved back to Massachusetts. "Chloe?" I whispered. My eyes darted toward the window that looked out onto the driveway where Mark was working. "Why are you calling me? How did you get this number?"
I got it off Todd's laptop billing statement, Sarah, Chloe sped out, her voice dripping with venom. Listen to me, you lying bitch. I know what happened. I know exactly what you and Todd did in that house while Mark was gone. The world seemed to completely tilt on its axis. The living room spun and I had to grab the edge of the kitchen island to keep from collapsing to the floor. The air left my lungs entirely. What are you talking about? I stammered, my voice completely vanishing into a terrified squeak. Chloe, you're crazy. Nothing happened. Don't lie to me, she screamed through the phone, so loudly that I had to pull the receiver away from my ear, terrified the sound would carry out to the garage. Todd came back to Chicago last night. He crawled right back to my apartment because he had nowhere else to go. He was drunk, he was crying, and he confessed the whole damn thing to me because he couldn't live with the guilt of what he did to Mark. He told me everything, Sarah. The couch, the whiskey, all of it. I couldn't breathe. My chest was heaving, my mind racing in a million different directions at once. Todd had gone back to Chicago. He hadn't moved to South Boston. He had lied to me, panicked, and run right back to the toxic relationship he claimed had ruined his life. And then he had spilled our secret to a woman who hated my guts. Chloe, please, I begged, the tears finally bursting from my eyes, hot and fast. Please, I am begging you, don't do this. It was a horrible mistake. It's over. If Mark finds out, it will kill him. Please, let us handle this. Handle it? Chloe laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that sent shivers straight down my spine. You think you get to just hide this? You think you get to keep your perfect little suburban life after what you did? Mark is a good man. He deserves to know what kind of disgusting trash he's married to and what kind of snake he calls a best friend. Chloe, wait! I'm not waiting for anything, she snarled. I'm sitting in my car right now, parked down the street from your house. I didn't call you from Chicago, Sarah. I drove all night. I'm right here, and I'm coming to tell Mark myself. The line went completely dead. I stood there, holding the silent phone to my ear, watching through the kitchen window as a strange sedan slowly turned the corner of our quiet, tree-lined street and began pulling up toward our driveway. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering against the hardwood floor with a sound that felt as loud as a gunshot in the silent house. Through the kitchen window, the sedan rolled to a stop right at the edge of our driveway. The engine cut out. My brain went entirely into shock, processing everything in slow motion. The driver's side door opened, and a woman stepped out. It was Chloe. She looked exactly like she did in her social media photos, but sharper, harder, her eyes fixed on our front door with a cold, terrifying purpose. She wore a dark denim jacket, her heels clicking aggressively against the asphalt as she stepped onto our property. Out in the garage, the sudden, sputtering roar of the lawnmower engine came to life. Mark had finally gotten it started. He was out there, completely isolated from the nightmare that was walking up our front steps, totally unaware that the next 60 seconds would alter his life forever. Panic, raw and electric, flooded my system. I ran to the front door, my socks sliding on the polished floor, and threw it open just as Chloe reached the bottom step of the porch. Chloe, stop! Please, just talk to me for 1 second, I whispered fiercely, stepping out onto the porch and closing the door behind me, trying to block her path. My voice was shaking so violently I could barely form the words. You don't have to do this. Whatever you want, whatever you think this fixes, it doesn't. Please, don't do this to Mark. Chloe stopped on the first step, looking up at me. Her face was pale, her makeup slightly smudged from what must have been an 18-hour drive, but her jaw was set like granite. She let out a short, bitter laugh that cut through the humid afternoon air. What does it fix? It fixes the fact that you and Todd think you're smarter than everyone else. It fixes the fact that Mark is living a lie with a woman who doesn't give a shit about him. Move out of the way, Sarah. I do care about him, I sobbed, the tears burning my eyes as I looked at her, entirely stripped of any pride. I was trapped on my own porch, begging a stranger for the survival of my marriage. I made a horrific mistake. I am dying inside because of it. If you want to punish me, punish me. Tell my boss, tell my family, do whatever you want to me. But please leave Mark out of this. He doesn't deserve to be broken like this. He's already broken. He just doesn't know it yet, Chloe said,
her voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss. She stepped past me, her shoulders shoving roughly against mine. She didn't even knock. She grabbed the brass handle of the front door and pushed it open, stepping right into my pristine, sunlit entryway. I stumbled in behind her, my heart hammering so hard I felt physically sick. "Chloe, please." Before the words could fully leave my mouth, the side door connecting the kitchen to the garage swung open. The distant rumble of the lawnmower became louder for a split second before Mark stepped into the kitchen, wiping grease from his hands with a dirty shop rag. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the two of us standing in the hallway. "Sarah?" Mark asked, his eyes darting from my tear-streaked, hysterical face to the strange woman standing in our foyer. He threw the rag onto the counter, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "What's going on? Who is this?" Chloe didn't hesitate. She took 3 steps into the kitchen, looking Mark dead in the eye. "Mark, you don't know me, but my name is Chloe. I'm Todd's girlfriend. Or, I guess, his ex-girlfriend now."
Mark's expression shifted from confusion to a mild, polite surprise, though the tension in the room was clearly making him uncomfortable. "Chloe? Oh, right, Todd's mentioned you. Wait, did something happen to Todd? Is he okay?" "Todd is fine," Chloe said, her voice incredibly steady, delivered with a brutal efficiency that made me want to scream. "But your marriage isn't. I drove all the way from Chicago to tell you the truth, because Todd is too much of a coward to do it himself. While you were away at your conference last week, your best friend didn't stay on your couch. He stayed in your bed, with your wife." The silence that followed was absolute. The air in the kitchen instantly turned to ice. I watched Mark's face, and the memory of that exact moment will haunt me until the day I die. I watched the confusion slowly warp into disbelief, and then into a sickening realization. He didn't look at Chloe. He looked directly past her, his eyes locking onto mine. "Sarah?" Mark's voice was incredibly quiet, almost a whisper, completely devoid of the warmth I had known for 7 years. "What is she talking about?" "Mark, I couldn't even form a coherent sentence. The guilt and fear choked me, trapping the air in my throat. I fell to my knees right there on the kitchen floor, my hands reaching out toward him in a pathetic gesture of begging. "Mark, I am so sorry. I am so sorry."
"It was one night. We were drunk. I don't know what happened. I lost my mind."
"So it's true," Mark interrupted. He didn't yell. He didn't scream or throw things. His voice was completely flat, dead, and empty. It was the voice of a stranger. Chloe looked at the two of us for another second, her expression completely unreadable now that the deed was done. The fiery anger that had driven her across 3 state lines seemed to evaporate, leaving behind a cold, hollow satisfaction. "You can check his laptop history or look at his phone records if you want proof, Mark. But clearly, you don't need it," she said quietly. She turned around, walked out the front door, and closed it gently behind her. A few moments later, the sound of her car engine faded down the street. Inside the house, neither of us moved. I was still on the floor, weeping so hard my chest ached, my forehead practically touching the hardwood. "Mark, please look at me. Please talk to me. I love you. I swear to God I love you. It didn't mean anything." "Don't use that word," Mark said. He finally walked toward me, but he didn't reach down to pull me up. He stopped a few feet away, staring down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Don't you ever say you love me again. You let him into our house. You let him into our life. My best friend, Sarah. The guy who stood next to me when I married you. I know. I hate myself. I am so sorry," I wailed, the tears blurring my vision completely. Mark let out a long, ragged breath, and when I looked up through my tears, I saw the first tracks of moisture spilling down his face. His hands were shaking violently as he pulled his wedding ring off his finger. He didn't throw it. He just set it down quietly on the granite kitchen island, right next to the keys to the house. "I'm going to a hotel," Mark said, his voice cracking slightly as the true weight of the betrayal finally began to crush him from the inside out. "Do not call me. Do not text me. Have your things out of this house by tomorrow night, or I will throw them into the yard myself." He didn't pack a bag.
He didn't even look back at the living room or the kitchen we had spent years designing together. He simply walked out the side door, into the garage, and within seconds, his SUV pulled out of the driveway, leaving me completely alone in the echoing silence of a ruined life.